The chalk hit the board so hard it snapped in half. White dust floated through the lecture hall like smoke after a gunshot, and every student froze as Professor Raymond Aldridge slowly turned around, his lips curled into a thin, satisfied smile. On the board behind him stretched a monstrous equation, layers of nonlinear differential operators tangled with abstract algebraic structures, symbols spiraling across the green surface like a maze designed to trap the human mind. It was the kind of problem doctoral candidates debated for weeks. It was not something given to a freshman. At the back of the room, Isaiah Carter lowered his eyes to his desk, pretending not to notice the way the class was already glancing at him. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of hidden potential, the narrator would say, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us why humanity still matters. Isaiah had learned, long before stepping onto the campus of Rothwell University, that attention could be dangerous. He had arrived on campus with a second-hand backpack and a scholarship letter folded carefully in his jacket pocket. His mother had cried when he left their small apartment in Detroit, holding his face in her hands as if memorizing it. She had worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria to keep him in advanced placement classes, telling him over and over that his mind was a gift no one could take from him. But gifts didn't erase assumptions. On his first day in advanced theoretical mathematics, Professor Aldridge had scanned the room with the bored confidence of a man who believed he could measure intelligence at a glance. His eyes had paused on Isaiah for half a second too long. A small crease formed between his brows. Then he continued roll call. Isaiah noticed everything. He always had. Numbers had made sense to him since childhood. At 9, he had corrected his middle school teacher's solution to a geometry proof. At 12, he had been solving calculus problems from library textbooks while other kids memorized multiplication tables. By 15, he was writing his own theorems in spiral notebooks, not for grades or praise, but because patterns whispered to him in quiet moments. Mathematics was not a subject to Isaiah, it was a language, and he was fluent. But Rothwell University was different. Here, brilliance wore tailored blazers and carried generational confidence. It spoke with polished accents and referenced private preparatory schools. Isaiah spoke softly and kept his hoodie sleeves pulled over his wrists. He answered questions correctly but never elaborated. He felt the weight of expectation pressing against his ribs, not the expectation that he would excel, but the expectation that he would fail. Professor Aldridge was known for his ruthlessness. A celebrated mathematician in his field, he had published groundbreaking papers on spectral theory and was rumored to have turned down positions at elite institutions. Students respected him, feared him, and whispered about him. He had little patience for what he called intellectual charity. 3 weeks into the semester, Aldridge began calling on Isaiah more frequently. At first, the questions were subtle, asking him to derive intermediate steps, to justify assumptions. Isaiah answered calmly, writing clean, elegant proofs that drew a few raised eyebrows from classmates. But instead of approval, Aldridge's gaze sharpened. One afternoon, after Isaiah solved a particularly tricky integral transformation faster than anyone else, Aldridge tilted his head slightly and said that sometimes luck disguises itself as talent. The room had gone quiet. Isaiah felt heat climb up his neck, but he kept his expression neutral. He had heard worse. In high school competitions, parents had asked him which coach helped him. Judges had double-checked his ID. He had learned that proving yourself twice was the price of entry. Then came the day of the impossible equation. It was mid-October, the air outside crisp and golden. Inside the lecture hall, tension hung thick as Aldridge wrote symbol after symbol across the board, constructing a problem so layered it looked almost theatrical. He stepped back and crossed his arms. This, he announced, is beyond the scope of this course. In fact, it is beyond most of you. His eyes settled on Isaiah. Mr. Carter, he continued evenly, since you appear confident in your abilities, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate. A few students shifted uncomfortably. Others watched with curiosity. Isaiah felt his pulse in his fingertips. He knew what this was. It wasn't an invitation. It was a test designed for failure. He stood slowly and walked to the front of the room. Up close, the equation was even more intricate. A hybrid problem combining nonlinear partial differential equations with abstract group symmetries, culminating in a boundary condition that appeared unsolvable under standard assumptions. It was clever. It was cruel. For a split second, doubt flickered. Then the numbers began to speak. Isaiah picked up the remaining half of the chalk. He didn't rush. He rewrote the final condition first, isolating a hidden constraint buried within the structure. A murmur rippled through the class as he introduced a transformation none of them had seen before, a substitution that reframed the system entirely. His handwriting was steady, deliberate. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Aldridge's confident posture began to soften. Isaiah's mind moved like light through glass, bending but never breaking. He identified a symmetry that simplified the operator, reduced the equation to a solvable eigenvalue problem, and constructed a proof that bypassed the intended trap entirely. Where Aldridge had expected confusion, Isaiah found clarity. When he wrote the final line and stepped back, the board told a different story than the one Aldridge had intended. Silence filled the room. Not the uncomfortable kind, the reverent kind. Isaiah returned to his seat without looking up. Professor Aldridge stared at the solution for a long time. He approached the board slowly, scanning each step. His fingers traced the logic in the air. There were no gaps, no errors. In fact, the method was not only correct, it was innovative. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. The next day, Aldridge requested a private meeting with Isaiah. The office was lined with awards, framed degrees, and shelves of dense textbooks. Isaiah stood near the doorway, unsure whether this was a reprimand or a continuation of the test. Aldridge began stiffly, asking where Isaiah had learned such techniques. Isaiah explained quietly that he had been studying advanced materials since middle school, that he often spent nights reading research papers online, that mathematics was the one place he felt entirely himself. Something shifted in the room. Aldridge asked more questions, not with suspicion now, but curiosity. Isaiah described a conjecture he had been exploring, related to spectral gaps in irregular domains. As he spoke, his reserve faded slightly, replaced by quiet passion. His eyes lit up when he described patterns, relationships, the beauty of hidden order. Aldridge listened, and for the first time in his long career, he confronted something uncomfortable, not Isaiah's brilliance, but his own bias. He realized that he had assumed limitation where there was none, had set a trap not to challenge but to humiliate. The impossible equation had not been an academic exercise. It had been a mirror. In the weeks that followed, something extraordinary happened. Aldridge began treating Isaiah not as a student to scrutinize, but as a mind to cultivate. He recommended research journals, invited him to graduate seminars, and introduced him to colleagues without condescension. Word of Isaiah's solution spread quietly through the department. Students who had once avoided him now asked for study sessions. Some apologized for their silence. But the most powerful moment came at the end of semester symposium. In a packed auditorium, Aldridge took the podium to present outstanding academic achievements. He spoke about intellectual courage, about the importance of challenging assumptions. Then he paused. He recounted, without embellishment, the day he wrote an equation intending to expose weakness, and instead discovered brilliance. He admitted that he had underestimated a student based on nothing more than perception. His voice did not waver, but it carried weight. He called Isaiah to the stage. The applause started slowly, then swelled into a standing ovation that seemed to shake the walls. Isaiah walked forward, heart pounding, overwhelmed not by pride but by the memory of every moment he had doubted whether he belonged. Aldridge handed him a certificate recognizing exceptional mathematical innovation. But more than that, he extended his hand, not as professor to student, but as scholar to scholar. Isaiah shook it. In that gesture lived something larger than academia. It was acknowledgement. It was growth. It was proof that prejudice, when confronted with truth, can yield to humility. Isaiah's journey did not become magically easy. There were still rooms where he felt watched, still conferences where he was mistaken for support staff. But he carried himself differently now. Not because others had changed, but because he knew, without question, that he belonged in any space his mind could enter. Years later, when Isaiah published his first major paper, he dedicated it to his mother, who had believed in him before anyone else did. Professor Aldridge co-authored that paper, not out of obligation, but respect. The impossible equation became legend in the department, not as a story of humiliation, but as a turning point. Students spoke of it as the day a professor learned as much as his class. And somewhere in Detroit, a cafeteria worker framed a copy of her son's published research, telling coworkers with quiet pride that brilliance doesn't always announce itself, sometimes it waits patiently to be seen. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that talent has no color and greatness can come from anywhere, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. And before we close, leave a comment with the words, "I see you," because sometimes the most powerful gift we can offer someone is recognition. Isaiah once sat in the back of a classroom, underestimated and unseen. But when given the chance, even a chance meant to break him, he rose. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with undeniable brilliance. And in doing so, he solved something far greater than an equation.